Welcome to episode 23 of the Growing Space podcast. We are getting even closer to the spring growing season with each passing day. And I don't know about you guys, but I am just so thrilled with the extended amount of sunlight that we're getting as we move towards the spring equinox. In this week's episode of the Growing Space podcast, I am going to share with you how to grow $1,000 worth of produce on your patio in a year. But I have some tips and recommendations for you for how to maximize the earning potential, if you will, of your growing space and your investment, your time, your energy into getting $1,000 worth of produce from your patio. So this is the perfect time to get started and start this investment and gain those returns for this year. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Welcome to the Growing Space podcast. I'm your host, Farmer Erin, owner of the Patio Farmer, and I believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. Tune in every Tuesday as I share my best tips, tricks, and encouragement for tending to homegrown edible plants. I'm here to support your food growing journey. The Growing Space podcast is sponsored by Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. Plant Club by the Patio Farmer is a monthly subscription service I started in 2020. It's a membership-based opportunity to take your growing journey to the next level. With 4 different membership options, you get to decide the amount and kind of support that's right for you. All Plant Club members receive access to my online community through a platform called Circle. Having access to this platform allows members to share pictures, ask questions, celebrate harvest, and get to know each other. All Plant Club members also have access to free seeds each month, along with information on how to plant and tend to their crops, with seeding instructions and downloadable resources from the Patio Farmer's Resource Library. Membership starts at just $14 a month. Join Plant Club today by visiting my website, thepatiofarmer.com/membership. So we are going to spend the bulk of today's episode talking about how to grow $1,000 worth of produce on your patio this year. But before we jump into that, I do just want to give a quick little reminder for my masterclass that's going to go live later this spring called the 6 S's to Success. I mentioned this in last week's podcast and just wanted to give you another little reminder here to be sure that you join the waitlist. So I will put the link in today's show notes to join the waitlist for my masterclass, the 6 S's to Success, which will go live on the first day of spring. Again, that is March 19th. And in this masterclass, you are going to get my full download, my full mental download of information about the 6 different components, the 6 key components for being successful in growing food at home. I am just so excited to share this with you. Also, by joining the waitlist, you'll receive a special invitation to a pre-launch event that I have planned virtually on Monday, March 18th. So that's the last day of winter officially. So together we will close the door on a previous season and open the door to a brand new season and a brand new opportunity to learn more about growing food at home. So again, I will put the link to my website with information all about this new masterclass that I'm working on. So I have another really exciting announcement to share with you all in today's episode, but I am going to wait and share that at the end of today's episode, and I can't wait to share it with you. So be sure to listen to this entire episode and tune in for those super special announcements right at the end of today's show. Okay, so jumping in, talking about how to grow $1,000 worth of produce on your patio this year. Now, as the patio farmer, you would assume that most of my clients grow food in containers in small spaces. I would say less than a third of my clients grow primarily or strictly in containers. So on the whole, most of my clients are growing in raised beds in their backyard and or have a collection of containers on their deck, on their patio, that they are also using to produce food. And as the patio farmer, I do believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. This episode is really going to speak to those who have a small space and they're trying to maximize what all they're able to grow in a year. I do just want to share a couple of parameters that I'm going to put on today's episode, okay? The first being, and this is particularly for those who are brand new to the Growing Space podcast. Hello, so glad that you're here. But I am based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm in the southeastern United States. And here in Charlotte, we are in the hardiness zone 8A. If you're unfamiliar with what the plant hardiness zone map is, it's a publication put out by the USDA, and it really helps to dictate what time, what crops you can grow during what time of year based on your geography. So I will put a link in the show notes to the USDA hardiness zone map, and you can check what your own hardiness zone is, and then you can take this content and modify accordingly based off of where you're growing. And if you ever have any questions about how to do that, how to modify what I am sharing with you for the zone that you're growing in, feel free to reach out to me. I will also drop my contact information in the show notes for today's episode as well. So that's the first kind of disclaimer or reference point for today's episode, is that I am, factoring in my nice, warm, mild, southern United States climate into this plan for growing $1,000 worth of produce on your patio. Now, the second kind of disclaimer or point of reference that I would like to call out is, if you are starting from scratch this spring with growing food at home, you are going to have an initial investment to setting up your growing space. So this episode talking about earning or growing $1,000 worth of produce, this is strictly speaking to the value of your harvest. I don't want you to think that by me sharing this information with you, that you are necessarily going to save $1,000 this year on your overall grocery bill. Instead, I'm going to show you the value in which your vegetables, your herbs, your homegrown food is going to bring you and your household this year. You will have an initial investment to get set up. And I will put in today's show notes some different recommendations for the containers and the materials that I'm going to be referencing throughout today's show. If you are, starting a brand new space this spring, I wouldn't be surprised if you spend $1,000 this year on the materials that you need to grow the things that I'm going to tell you are worth $1,000 in your harvested value. If you are starting this year, think of your materials and your initial setup as an investment in your space. So this year you might break even, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes, which you can't see, but I'm doing air quotes. You might break even in terms of how much you invest initially and the value that you harvest from your space. And then next year, when you go to plant, if you follow the same strategy or blueprint for growing, then you are going to have a much higher net, right? You're going to have a higher value or maybe a higher return. Maybe that's the better way of thinking about this. You will have a higher return on your growing space each subsequent season that you grow food. So it really is an initial investment, and then that investment is going to reap tons of rewards for you in the seasons and years to come. We are talking about harvesting a $1,000 value of produce from your patio in today's episode. You might be asking yourself, how did you come up with these numbers and this value? So this is the third kind of parameter or disclaimer to today's episode. So I shop at Food Lion, and that's where I priced out this harvest value for today's episode. I shop at Food Lion because where I live, it is extremely convenient. When I leave my driveway in either direction, I hit a Food Lion in like less than 2 miles. So anytime I'm coming home, I pass a Food Lion and it's just super convenient for me. So Food Lion, has lower prices, which I honestly love. Definitely helps with our household budget to shop at Food Lion. Any organic produce that I need that I don't grow at home, I can get at Food Lion. So I am using prices for organic produce as much as possible. Now, I say that as a disclaimer because chances are if you are shopping, no matter where you are shopping or where you are comparing your homegrown harvest to store-bought prices, you will most likely be at the similar value level, give or take a little bit, or a higher. I haven't looked specifically at like a Whole Foods or an Earth Fare to run these numbers, but generally speaking, from personal experience and someone who absolutely loves grocery shopping, I would anticipate the earnings from shopping at Whole Foods or Earth Fare or even like Harris Teeter or Publix to be considerably higher than Food Lion. Take that value for what it is. I am using very moderate, very affordable prices to run this value analysis for you today. Those are just a quick little disclaimers and frame of reference for what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to first lay out this space that I would recommend having in place in order to grow $1,000 worth of produce in a year on your patio. Now, also just keep in mind, this is just an example. You can set up your growing space to be equally productive and give you an equal value of harvest in other ways, right? But I am just going to use this particular layout to sketch out the blueprint for today's episode. For the purposes of our conversation, we are going to imagine our patio space has room for 7 containers. 2 of those containers are going to be elevated cedar raised beds. And remember, I'm going to put links to examples of what I have in mind for these in today's show notes so you can take a look and see if some of these might be right for your space. But we're going to use 2 cedar raised beds that are elevated. So that means that they stand about waist high and give you usually somewhere between 10 and 18 inches of soil depth to plant. The length and width for these 2 cedar raised beds is going to be 2 feet wide by 4 feet long. Now, you could certainly go bigger and you could go smaller. If you use a smaller raised bed, just keep in mind how that could impact your $1,000 worth of harvested value for the year. I love cedar, which if you listen to my recent episode, 2 episodes ago, I did a whole show about building raised beds, and I talked a lot about cedar in that episode. So if you are interested in putting in raised beds, go back to episode 21 and give that a listen for some tips all about building raised beds. Now, 3 other containers that I would recommend having to grow $1,000 worth of produce on your patio this year are 3 large round plastic pots. When you're shopping for these pots, you want something that is north of 20 inches in diameter, so fairly large pots. You could use a grow bag if you'd like. Grow bags are considerably less expensive, much more budget friendly. But choosing something that gives you at least 20 inches in diameter is ideal, again, for the purposes of this conversation. And if you are going to go with like a plastic, you could even do metal or a resin container. Make sure it has drainage holes in the bottom. You don't want your containers to hold moisture. You want water to be able to flow freely. If you are concerned about, water maybe dripping onto a downstairs neighbor's deck or patio, or if you just want to keep it a little tidier in your space, then you can consider putting a saucer underneath your container, but you really want to make sure that you have drainage holes. I actually don't know why, companies make pots and containers without drainage holes. It's really frustrating. A little bit of a pet peeve of mine because all plants need well-draining soil. So anyway, make sure you have drainage holes if you're using a solid container. If you decide to use a grow bag, then you have automatic drainage built into your container, which is great. And then this will kind of depend on your space, but 2 24-inch long railing box planters. You can find railing box planters that sit on a 4-inch railing, a 6-inch railing. There are even ones that you can adjust the width for, and you can find ones that are both railing box planters and can just sit on the flat ground. So if you have a railing to work with, this can be a really beautiful way of utilizing vertical space to grow more. If you do not have a railing that you could put a planter on, then maybe you consider doing another large 20-inch container, or just getting a container that gives you, 24 inches by maybe 10 inches wide, something like that. And again, I will put recommendations for those railing box planters in today's show notes. So those are the containers that I would recommend for growing, at a minimum, for growing $1,000 worth of produce on your patio this year. So you have your containers, you have them in your growing space. You've chosen the sunniest spot that you have available. This is really important. Your plants are going to need at least 6 hours of sunlight every day to grow. Some plants are going to need a little bit more. So you want to pick your sunniest spot that you have, and that's where you're going to put your containers. Then you'll need to fill your containers, of course, with delicious, high quality soil. And the soil that you use, it's really important that it is a potting soil, a potting mix. Those two kind of titles for soil, potting mix, are going to be the best to use in small spaces. Now, any store-bought soil is an engineered product, right? And potting soil and potting mix are engineered with specific ingredients to help support your plants grow and to help increase drainage, airflow for your plants' root systems. So making sure that you use a potting soil or a potting mix. My 2 favorite soil companies, actually, I'll name 3 favorite soil companies. One is a company that's actually out of California. This is my all-time favorite potting soil ever. And it's produced by a company called Fox Farm. I will put the link in the show notes, don't worry. But Fox Farm makes a delicious potting soil called Happy Frog. You can get it. You can get it on Amazon. Yes, I'll put the link. You can also find it at hydroponic retailers nationwide. So if you have a hydroponic retailer in your community, check them out and see if they carry Happy Frog. It's got great packaging, fantastic marketing, big old frog right on the bag. But that soil is super high quality, and I have always had excellent success using Happy Frog potting soil. If you live in the Charlotte area, just giving a quick little shout out to my friends at American Beauty Garden Center on Independence Boulevard. They carry Happy Frog by the pallet and they are my local source. Make sure you go hit them up if you're looking for that particular soil. Now, going back to the idea of investment, Happy Frog potting soil is 100% an investment in your space. Any high quality potting soil is going to be an investment. Happy Frog, it does have a pretty price tag on it. Spending the money on that Happy Frog potting soil, it is 100% worth it. And given the fact that we're talking about such a small space and one that we are going to invest in for future seasons, for me, it's a no-brainer, like 100% worth the investment in Happy Frog. If you wanted some other options for high quality soils to use, these two are going to be a little bit more specific to the Charlotte area just because they're sourced by local companies. One is Daddy Pete's Potting Soil. They are a local soil company that is based in Stony Point, which is kind of close to Statesville, I think just a little west of Statesville. And you can find Daddy Pete's pretty readily at most small independent garden centers, nurseries in the Charlotte area. So Daddy Pete's is great to use. I use them whenever I'm not using Happy Frog. I use Daddy Pete's and I go through a lot of soil. So I use a lot of both of these soils throughout the year. But Daddy Pete's tends to be a little bit more accessible in terms of pricing, and it's a great product. Another soil that I would recommend you using is from Super Sod, and the soil is Soil 3, or sometimes people call it Soil Cubed. And usually this is sold as like bulk soil, like you would buy a whole yard of soil at a time. You certainly do not need a cubic yard of soil if you are growing on your patio, but they have started selling Soil 3 by the cubic foot. So you can get smaller quantities. Just check out their website, which of course I will link that in the show notes. Here's a quick little tip for when you're trying to calculate your soil volume. You want to take the dimensions of your space, your container, your raised bed, and you want to get your dimensions in feet first. Just think about that. Feet first when calculating your soil volume. Convert all of your inches, or if you have centimeters for whatever reason, convert those to feet, and then do your length times width times height calculation for volume. Then you will have the amount of cubic feet needed to fill your container. The 2x4 elevated raised beds most likely are going to need 8 cubic feet or 4 large bags of soil. If you go with Soil 3, you'll need 8 1 cubic foot bags of soil to fill one of those raised beds. You can easily figure out, depending on your space and depending on what, size setup you want to go with, how much you can expect to spend on soil. So once you have your containers, so those are the containers and some quick soil recommendations that I would offer you as you are preparing to earn, or as you are preparing to grow $1,000 worth of produce on your patio this year. Now, another thing to call out before we get into the numbers, we are going to use every inch of this space to grow $1,000 worth of produce this year. Because of that, we want to plant as early as possible for each season. We are going to plant this space 3 times this year. We are going to plant in the spring, we're going to plant in the summer, and we're going to plant in the fall. We want to plant this space for spring in early March. And then we want to transition this space from spring veggies to summer veggies in early May through June. We have a little bit of flexibility, a little bit more flexibility there. And then we want to transition this space from summer vegetables to fall vegetables in early September. So think like Labor Day. Now, our fall vegetables and herbs are going to be able to grow through September through the end of the year and even through early March of the following year, which is when we would transition to spring veggies again. So that's the timing. That's kind of, the schedule of when things should be planted. Let's meet the crops that we're going to grow. So the crops that I chose for today's episode were chosen very carefully. These are all vegetables and herbs and fruits that you can either harvest from the same plant over and over again, or you get one harvest per plant, but that plant does not require a whole lot of time to grow. It's a faster plant to mature. So I really chose these crops keeping in mind seasonality and space and how frequently you would be able to harvest them. So here in zone 8A, we are able to grow pretty much year round, and we have 2 cool seasons. So spring and fall, we can grow cool season vegetables. So those are going to be leafy greens, root vegetables, and herbs. So for the purposes of this episode, I am keeping those spring and fall veggies the same. You can totally switch things up if you would like. You can grow different things. But for a small space, such as a patio, these spring and fall veggies are going to give you the most bang for your buck, which is really what we're after for today's episode. Okay, so let's just go through this space as I have described it, our containers. So I'll tell you which crops I have in mind for each container throughout the year and how many times I would anticipate being able to harvest from the plants growing in each container throughout the year. And I will put the value according to my research and what I have found from shopping at Food Lion. I will associate the dollar value to that crop and that number of harvests for the year. We're going to start with those elevated raised beds, those 2 foot by 4 foot cedar raised beds. Now, the first one, I would recommend planting the first one with all perennial herbs. So that's our first crop. Perennial herbs, you could choose things like rosemary, sage, thyme, chives, garlic chives, oregano, lavender. All of those herbs are perennials, meaning that they are either evergreen or will continue to grow for you throughout the year. Perennial plants also like to take up whatever size space you give them. So it's good to keep them all together in one space. I would also anticipate that once you plant these herbs in the spring, you'll need to give them maybe 6 weeks. So you want to make sure you give your plants some time to get established and start growing. So once your plants are maybe, 12 to 18 inches tall, then you can start harvesting from them. So that takes a little bit of time. No pun intended, right? Sorry, it's too easy. So I would anticipate once these herbs are established that you would be able to harvest 40 weeks of the year at least twice. Or you could think of this as harvesting 2 small clamshells worth of herbs. Like if you think about the clamshells of perennial herbs that are available in the produce section, I would anticipate being able to harvest 2 clamshells worth of perennial herbs per week once they're established. Now at Food Lion, one of those clamshells is $2.50 a pop. So that right there saves you $5 per week if you're harvesting those fresh herbs. If we have 40 weeks a year where we're able to harvest 2 clamshells of herbs from one raised bed, and those clamshells are valued at $2.50, then that is over the course of a year, $200 worth of produce right there. So with our first raised bed, we are a fifth of the way to $1,000 just with our perennial herbs. Isn't that crazy? So if you like to cook at home and you like to use fresh herbs, stop buying them from the store. Get you a raised bed, plant you some perennial herbs. So your second elevated raised bed, that's 2 feet by 4 feet, I have slated for the spring and fall to plant lettuce, specifically leaf lettuce, like that gourmet salad mix that you're used to buying in the grocery store, also in clamshells. I would plant that whole second elevated raised bed in leaf lettuce. Now, leaf lettuce is a cut and come again variety of lettuce that gives you small leaves that you can use in salads and to go along with any meals. I would anticipate, if you seed in the spring and the fall, that you would be able to harvest 4 ounces of spring mix from this raised bed 30 times in a year. And at Food Lion, 4 ounces of organic salad mix, lettuce mix, is $3 a pop. Over the course of a year, if you harvest, 4 ounces of lettuce 30 times at $3 per container or $3 per 4 ounces, you are going to grow $90 worth of lettuce in that space. Once your lettuce is done growing in the spring, you can transition that same space to growing zucchini and cucumber. I would plant 2 zucchini plants and 2 cucumber plants in that same space. And when you plant, you want to plant at a diagonal. So you're really able to give your zucchini and cucumber as much space as possible within that raised bed. That will help with increasing ventilation and access to sunlight throughout the summer season, which will help keep your plants nice and happy and healthy and productive. From those 2 zucchini plants, I would anticipate you being able to harvest at least 30 zucchini throughout the summer season. At Food Lion, I pay $1.50 for certified organic zucchini on average. That would earn you, or you would be able to grow $45 worth of zucchini with 2 plants in that elevated raised bed. With cucumber, if you choose a seedless, like European or Asian variety of cucumber to plant, those for me at Food Lion usually run $2.60 a piece. For the seedless, the fancy thin skin cucumber, I would anticipate with 2 plants that you would be able to harvest at least 30 cucumbers in total for the summer season. Doing the math, that means that you're growing $78 worth of cucumbers in that space along with your zucchini. So combined, that is well over $100 of produce for the summer season from that one raised bed. Moving on to our large round containers. One I would have totally planted in spinach for spring and fall. So with planting spinach in a large space, like a 20-inch diameter pot, twice a year, so in the spring and fall, I would anticipate you being able to harvest 5 ounces of spinach leaves or a clamshell worth of spinach leaves 20 times throughout the year. You would likely get more harvest from your spinach in the fall season than the spring. I will give you that little disclaimer. And 5 ounces of spinach leaves, again, organic spinach leaves at Food Lion cost me $4 for a clamshell container. $4 times 20 times is $80 worth of spinach from a large pot per year. Another one you can plant with kale. So I would choose like a lacinato kale or green curly kale, any variety of kale. And in a 20-inch pot, you probably have room for 3 kale plants. And again, this would be spring and fall. And again, in the fall, you will get more kale. You'll get more volume off of your kale plants than in the spring. And I would anticipate that with those plants, you would be able to harvest 40 bunches of kale throughout the year from that space. And using trusty old Food Lion, I typically spend $3.75 on a bunch of kale. So, we're talking like, I don't know, 7 to 10 full-size leaves, I spend $3.75. So over the course of a year, that is going to yield $150 worth of kale for you from that space. Then in the third large 20-inch pot, I would plant all radishes. And radishes are a beautiful little root vegetable that are here in Zone 8A. We can pretty much grow these year round, and they're super fast to grow. So radishes take, once they germinate, which happens usually in less than a week, radishes will mature. They'll be of harvest size in a month. Less than 30 days, you'll be able to harvest your radishes once they sprout. Just keep radishes perpetually planted in your space, because 1 6-ounce bunch of radishes, which, probably is 6 to 8 radishes, depending on the variety that you're going for, is $2 at the grocery store. And if you have the ability to harvest a total of 40 bunches of radish in a year, which when you think about it is really not that much, you can grow $80 worth of radish in your space, in this space, okay, on your patio. Now, in that same container, when you're ready to transition to summer vegetables, I would put in pepper plants, like mini peppers, like lunchbox peppers, like the cute, colorful bags of peppers that you buy in the grocery store for $3.50. I would plant 3 pepper plants in that large container. I would anticipate you being able to harvest about 10 bags of those from those plants in a year. And in doing so, you will have grown $35 worth of peppers in that pot. In those 2 other containers, going back to our 2 larger containers, one with spinach and one with kale for spring and fall. In those 2, I would plant cherry tomatoes and basil in the summertime. 1 cherry tomato plant per pot, and then 2 basil plants per pot. So across your 2 cherry tomato plants, I would anticipate you being able to harvest 12 ounces of tomatoes at a time over 12 weeks, or, 144 ounces of cherry tomatoes throughout the growing season. So at $5 per 12-ounce container, that means that you are growing $60 worth of cherry tomatoes across those 2 pots. With your 4 basil plants in total, I would anticipate you being able to harvest 1.5 ounces of fresh basil leaves at least 20 times throughout the summer growing season. And fresh basil at my grocery store is $5 for 1.5 ounces of basil. It's so crazy to think about these numbers. $5 for organic basil at Food Lion. And if you can grow that yourself and harvest it that many times in a year, then you have grown $100 worth of produce just in basil. Finally, we have those railing box planters that I mentioned, or the equivalent for your space if you don't have a railing box planter. In one of those railing box planters, I would plant parsley and green onion. I would plant probably 3 bunches of each one. And both of these herbs, vegetables, depending on how you look at them, are biennials, meaning they will flower in their second year of growing, which means that you get to harvest from them for the same plant for 2 whole years. Throughout the year, I would anticipate you being able to get from that space at least 24 bunches of both parsley and green onion. At my grocery store, each bunch of parsley, organic parsley, and green onion is $1.50. Combined for that container, that would grow $72 worth of produce throughout the year. That is, if you're only harvesting 24 bunches of both green onion and parsley. But I would bet money that you'll be harvesting more than that from that space throughout the year. And then the second railing box planter, in the spring, I would load that puppy up with cilantro, if you're a cilantro fan. If you're not a cilantro fan, then honestly, you could do one railing box planter of green onion and one of parsley. If planted in the spring and fall, I would anticipate that in a given year, you would be able to harvest 20 bunches of cilantro. And again, at that similar pricing of $1.50 per bunch, you are growing $30 worth of cilantro in one railing box planter. And then when your cilantro is done growing, you can transition that space either into growing radishes, so perpetuating your year of radish, or you can use that space to increase the amount of basil that you're able to grow to get you to growing $1,000 worth of produce on your patio. So I did the math and I tallied up all of these numbers and I got actually just over $1,000 when I added all of this up. So if you were to grow and reach these anticipated harvest goals and match that harvest quantity to how much you would spend if you shop at Food Lion, or really, honestly, if you shop at any grocery store, you would grow over $1,000 worth of produce on your patio in this space. Hoorah! Yay! So if you only take away one thing from today's episode, it is that you do not need a huge space to be able to grow food year round and to be able to grow enough food to make it worth your time. I hope that you enjoyed this little exercise, and I hope that this will help you think about the ways that you can utilize your space, no matter how big or small it is, and help you realize the harvest value of growing your own food and understanding the investment in your growing space will pay off. Okay, so I did give you a little tease at the beginning of today's episode, stating that I have two surprises for you, or two announcements. And one I'm going to use as our little sign-off tidbit morsel of information. So if you're brand new to the Growing Space podcast, every week I like to sign off with a small little snippet of information that is usually not related to today's content. It's just kind of a fun little FYI or moment to end on. And this week's little tidbit morsel of information is a little bit of an announcement. In the fall, when I had just started this podcast, I did 2 episodes where I requested questions from you all to feature in the episode. And I am bringing that back this spring. I would love to do maybe next month or maybe in April. I would love to do an entire episode where I answer your questions. Doesn't that sound like fun? I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear how things are going in your growing space, what you have planned to grow, how things are going, if you have any concerns or questions for me that you would like me to answer on my podcast, then please send them to me via email. I will put this email in today's show notes, but it's just thegrowingspacepodcast@gmail.com. Again, it's thegrowingspacepodcast@gmail.com. You can send me pictures. You can send me as much information as you think I need to be able to answer your question on my podcast. I think my goal for having questions is going to be mid-March. So you have a couple of weeks to think of the questions that you want me to answer and send them over to me. Again, you can email them to thegrowingspacepodcast@gmail.com. And I think it's going to make for a really fun episode. For next week's episode, you guys, I am so excited. I will be sharing with you my first guest interview on the podcast. And it's a really exciting, really cool topic, but she doesn't grow plants and she doesn't grow animals. She grows fungi. She grows mushrooms. Yes, I sat down with my friend Olga Katic from Mushroom Mountain. Mushroom Mountain is located in Greenville, South Carolina. And I've been working with Olga over the last couple years for sourcing mushroom kits for clients of mine. And we recorded an entire episode just for you, learning all about King Stropharia mushrooms, why they are so amazing to plant in our growing space alongside our vegetables. Even if we're growing in raised beds and small spaces, there are tons of benefits of growing these little mushrooms, also known as the garden giants, in our growing space. So be sure to tune in next week for my very first guest on the podcast. That is a wrap for today. And yeah, get growing. Get started growing $1,000 worth of produce this year. What are you waiting for? All right, have fun, and we'll see you next week for Mushrooms with Olga. Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Growing Space Podcast. I hope that you learned something new and that you were able to take this new information home with you and implement into your growing journey and into your growing space. As always, I am here to support you and your food growing journey. If you'd like to learn more about the different services and resources and membership programs that I run through the Patio Farmer, please check out my website, thepatiofarmer.com. You can also follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and oh my gosh, most recently, TikTok. Wow. I know. Here I am. Patio Farmer is on TikTok. It's very exciting. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like or a rating or a review if you want. Maybe share a little comment about your favorite part of the episode. Share it with a friend. The more interactions I get with my little podcast online, the more I'm able to help people just like you in their food growing journeys. As always, thanks for being here, and I will see you again next week.